Hello and welcome to For Flying Out Loud, a podcast that aims to inspire, empower and help all of our listeners to dream bigger. My name is Andrew Neofetu and I'm super happy to welcome you to another inspirational episode of the podcast. Now, over the years, something that's always blown me away as a pilot is the pace of development of aircraft. From the very first flight of the Wright brothers, this pace has been absolutely mind-blowing. A matter of just 20 years ago, yes, I know that probably seems like a long time ago for some of our listeners, I thought that flying the Harrier was pretty advanced. But of course, this was also the time of a new generation of aircraft known as 5th generation or 5th gen, like the F-22 Raptor. What a phenomenal aircraft that is, by the way, and more of that later today. As cool as all of this was, getting real-world experience operating and fighting against other dissimilar aircraft was a real challenge. We often did air combat against other aircraft, which, as fun as it was, didn't fully emulate the threat, which could be very, very different. This episode of the For Flying Out Loud podcast is brought to you by Skychaser Aviation Recruitment, a window to your perfect pilot candidate. He's a former RAF fighter pilot who started his career flying the Tornado F3. One of Britain's top fighter pilots in 2006, recognised for his outstanding flying ability and natural flair for building effective teams, he was chosen as the first non-US citizen to fly the 5th generation F-22 Raptor for the US Air Force. In 2006, a life-defining moment, an intersection of time, education and experience combined with his passion for aviation, saw him venture into a completely new realm at the very cutting edge of technology, a chance encounter. Today it's a great pleasure to welcome, and I'm super excited about this one, Daniel Robinson, founder and CEO of Red6. So Daniel, very warm welcome to you For Flying Out Loud. How are you doing?
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here. Really excited to share the story and dive in. Yeah.
And looking very tanned, because I think you're joining us from the US, obviously somewhere sunny in the US.
Well, it's actually pouring down with rain right now, but it's normally pretty sunny here. But I'm lucky enough, I've managed to escape to the Bahamas for a few days. So I'm putting a little bit of a tan, but it's not representative of how it normally is.
That sounds dry. But last time we chatted, we had a quick chat before we did this recording today. You were in some sort of open top Jeep, weren't you? And you can see where the Hornet gets its name from, because some sort of ginormous bug sort of landed on.
That's right. That was actually out in California, which is where I split my time between the East Coast and the West Coast. So I'm perpetually jet lagged. But yeah, that's right. I've forgotten that I was attacked by a Hornet the first time we spoke and chased out of the car. I totally forgot about that, for sure.
It's a shame we haven't got there's a sort of bloopers outtake, but yeah. So
yeah, it was a good one.
Sam, thanks for joining me, mate. And listen, I always start these podcasts out by getting into how you got into aviation and actually reading a bit about your story and watching some videos online. There was a lot of things that sort of resonated with me, because your early years, a bit like mine really, that my local area was an ex-mining town. Of course, at the end of the 80s, all of the mining towns were closing. There was a lot of, real hardship for people. And it wasn't a sort of place where people really aspired to, go into anything much out of the local area. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all, but those sort of aspirational things didn't really exist. So can you tell us a little bit about your early years and how you sort of got this initial sort of bug for aviation, and maybe a bit of background to that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, much like yourself, I kind of grew up in a coal mining community. I was born in the north of England, a proud Hartlepoolian, monkey hanger, as we're lovingly referred to. So probably not the most likely of places to come and join the RAF. But yeah, I was born there, and then grew up in a nearby sort of coal mining town, which is named Peterlee, I think was the name. And there was a bunch of adjoining villages to that thing. But it was the whole industry was anchored around coal mining. And as you can probably understand, there wasn't too much to do as we were growing up as kids there. But there was this one movie theater in this local little mining village that, on occasion, my dad would take me to. From being a little boy, really. And I remember the first movie I ever saw really distinctly was Superman with the late great Christopher Reeves.
Yeah.
And of course, you know it's coming, and I was just enthralled and enamored with the idea of Superman, being able to fly, and then being able to use this force and power for good, and him flying around the streets of Manhattan, rescuing kittens from trees. And that's how I want my Superman to be, right? Just doing the mundane superhero stuff day to day, flying around. But it really ignited two things, like a love affair and passion for sort of flight and and also actually a very early love affair with New York City and just this romanticism of the city, which would come to feature in my life later on. I came out of that movie theater, and I kid you not, and you could probably identify this. My mom would tell me I'd spend hours in the garden outside trying to take off like this, defying gravity, not fully understanding gravity, but convinced I could do it. And that didn't work, right? So then I'd take the tablecloth and I put that around my shoulders, and that didn't work. And I was like, well, that's because I'm wearing my underpants underneath my trousers. So I took those off and I put them on top of my trousers to see if that would work. That didn't work. And so next it was, we had this like miniature grand piano that my mom and dad had taken as payment for some work they'd done, and the people couldn't afford to pay him. So we randomly had this piano that no one played, but I used to use that as like an aircraft carrier. So I'd run off the ramp and dive off it like this, and mom and dad were trying to catch me constantly. Not destined to fly. And then the next movie I saw was Star Wars, and I always say the story. Of course, we all love lightsabers, but for me, it was Luke Skywalker in the X-wing fighter at low level through the Death Star on the runs, and I was like, okay, convinced I'm now going to be a spaceship X-wing fighter pilot, and I spent a lot of my life outside in my imagination and running around in the mud with a stick, and I'd spend hours outside. And I'd build cockpits in the mud, so I'd have like stones for switches and sticks for control columns, all that kind of stuff. Just imagining myself as an X-wing pilot. And then, obviously, much like many people of our generation, I think I was maybe just 13 or something like that when I saw the movie Top Gun, and I was on a little. Yeah, I was on a little beach in Corfu. It was a really vivid memories. Like there was this little guy that had a shack, and he had, do you remember the old pirated copies of VHSs? And we'd always get like movies a year after the States would get them, right? So there was this pirated copy of a movie, and every afternoon we'd go in and watch a film. And this one day, this movie came on, Top Gun. I was sitting with my sister Lucy and dipping on a Coke and watching these guys, thinking, oh my God, this is actually a job. And from that moment forward, that sort of ignited the passion, and that was it. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. The problem was I was growing up in like one of the toughest towns and in one of the toughest schools, and to get myself from that place to ultimately, how competitive it is, to the cockpit of a fighter aircraft seemed like just an endeavor that was just impossible at the time. So I really started thinking about like, how do I achieve this? And if I know what I need to achieve to get there, I just started working backwards to the age of, I was 13 at the time, and starting to put a plan in place to maximize my chances of success. So that was really the genesis of how I became interested in it, and then had to overcome a bunch of hurdles on the way to it. But that was basically the start. So 3 movies.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I remember literally sitting there. It's funny the things you remember, isn't it? I remember being in tears on my bed watching the sort of, actually it was the closing scene of Top Gun. It was that bit where these F-14 sort of barrel rolling around each other. I mean, it's all very romantic and not entirely like real life. But I remember thinking, I'm never going to do that. And in fact, I remember being at school, and I'd say that there were some very encouraging teachers, but I do remember being told, not everybody gets to do what they dream to do. So maybe go and think about some other career avenues. Is that something that happened with you, Dan?
Oh yeah. So I have a really specific story that was kind of the genesis of this like ferocity of drive, I think, that sits in me. And it was a teacher. I won't mention his name, but it was basically, we're doing a class, what do you want to be when you grow up? And as you can identify, aspirations for kids were not particularly high in those areas, right? So all noble professions, but the kids would write down a piece of paper what they want to be. And I dared to write, I want to be a fighter pilot. And I folded it up, and he was reading them all out, and he gets to mine. I'm towards the end of the list. He goes, Mr. Robinson coming up here. And I thought, Jack, look, top of the class. Here I go. First time ever on top of the class. And he said, Mr. Robinson here thinks he's better than everyone else. Mr. Robinson wants to be a fighter pilot. The whole class started laughing at me. And he looked at me, and I remember the contempt. He looked at me and he said, go sit down and write something sensible. And I was a really sensitive kid, right? So I went and sat down. I was mortified, really humiliated. And he was like, come on, hurry up. And he was reading the rest of them out, and I was panicking. What should I write? And I decided upon something. I wrote it down, folded it up, and took it out to him. And he opened that piece of paper, and he looked at me, and he smiled, and he said, get out of the class, give me 10 laps to the playground. And it was pouring down with rain. And so I ran 10 laps to the playground, because that second piece of paper said, I want to be a fighter pilot too. And
Yeah.
I remember the kids laughing at me as I'm running down around the playground in the rain. And whilst I was completely humiliated, and I was really a deeply sensitive kid, it also ignited this spark in me, which became like kind of a furnace. And it was just this like ferocious drive of, I'll show you, watch this.
Isn't
And that was it. That was the real catalyst for it, honestly.
isn't it funny how, well, certainly for me anyway, it sounds like this may be the case for you, that these things really do stick with you for life. And actually, I still vividly remember all those sort of episodes where, I was bullied at school, or various things were happening, people were trying to say it wasn't good enough, it wasn't going to happen. But that has
Yeah,
driven a lot of what I do now, not just in terms of drive, but also in terms of wanting to help other people. So,
for sure.
if I see someone that's, having a bit of a tough time, my that sort of natural instinct is to want to help them, want to support them, and completely the opposite to how I was treated. So sounds like it's driven a lot of things. Ultimately, it did work out for you, Dan, and you ended up joining the Royal Air Force. Although I do recall you somewhere noting you wish you wanted to be a Navy fighter pilot, so I was somewhat surprised you didn't try and
Uh,
join the Navy. But
I will never admit to wanting to be a Navy fighter pilot. I don't know where you got that from. It's all hearsay. It's not true. No, I look, in my mind, it was like from that moment, it was how do I get myself into the Air Force? So the logical path was obviously to become a milkman. So I started out as a milkman, and the reason I did that is I'd get 40 pounds a week, which was massive in those days. But I mean, I'd literally get up at like 4 o'clock in the morning as a kid, and I'd deliver milk, like crates of milk, miles on end, and save up my money. And every 2 weeks I could afford a flying lesson. So I started learning to fly at the age of 14. And to your previous point on the importance of role models in your life and just being a force for good, there was a gentleman I met named Peter Gray who became a really prominent mentor in my life, and he was a flying instructor, and he took me flying. And I remember flying 1 or 2 rides with him, and he put his arm around me and told me, "Hey, I think you might have some talent for this." And just those words are like, like
boom.
bathing in sunshine, right? It was like, oh, maybe I can do this. And so he started sort of making me aware of like the scholarship scheme to the Air Force Academy and all that kind of stuff. And that was ultimately my route through. And I got my pilot's license for my driving license actually, and was, I've been flying since I was 14. And so ultimately, made it through the scholarships to Cranwell and off I went. So I was very lucky, but that human being really changed my life. And I check in with him at regular intervals as I went through my career. And it was always wonderful for him to see this little boy growing up. And he's a really important part of my life, Peter.
That's really nice to hear. Yeah, as the people that maybe aren't as helpful, and that you remember those, but you also remember the people that are super helpful. So, yeah, and
You
just
do.
hearing that
You do.
story is going to be inspirational for people, and that's the whole idea of this podcast, really, is to inspire people to maybe
Sure,
think.
and it doesn't take much to just impact a child in a really positive way. Just so especially you come from backgrounds where you're kind of struggling or was going through adversity. Just the kindest word is enough to inspire people, and it really was the case for me, for sure.
Absolutely good stuff. And then, so you did actually manage to forge this path through to fly the Tornado F3, and I'm sure viewers that know anything about aeroplanes will know there was a bit of banter anyway between the Tornado F3 pilots and the Sea Harrier pilots back in the day. In fact, there's a great picture there. There's a Typhoon pilot friend of mine said it's a great picture of an AMRAAM carrying a Sea Harrier. But there was,
That's right.
but there was quite
That's right.
a lot of banter between the Tornado F3 pilots and the Sea Harrier pilots, who were sort of both playing at this air defence role. And really, of course, the real players in it, although we showed, we did pretty well actually, but the real players were the big aircraft, F-15s all coming in with all these
Oh, for
weapons on
sure.
up at 40,000 odd feet, with about 2 hours on task. And yeah. But how was your experience of flying a Tornado F3? Talk to us briefly about that.
So I loved it, and I remember even from the beginning of my career in the Air Force, I wanted to fly the F3 right from the beginning because I just wanted to be a fighter pilot. I didn't want to be a
Yeah.
bomber pilot. I literally wanted to be a fighter pilot. And so it was the F3, or you join the Navy and you go fly the Sea Harrier. And look, in hindsight, when I think back to that aircraft, I loved every second of it. I mean, you always love your first
Yeah.
airplane, right? It was
Yeah,
amazing.
exactly.
But under no illusions I was under no illusions as to the capabilities of that platform. Certainly in the early days, it did get better. But when I joined it, I mean, we're still firing the 9LI, I think we called it, and
Yeah.
Skyflash, a semi-active missile on an airplane that turns like crap, and you're committed to the merge. At least you guys had the AMRAAM, and you had the was it the Sea Vixen, which was a medium PRF radar, which was pretty good. Even if like the Harrier and the Tornadoes they are crap platforms, weren't they? But
They
in
were.
terms of in terms of the tech you had, with your your radar and the AMRAAM. A significant step up from the Tornado at the time, although we ultimately did catch up with the missiles and stuff. But yeah, it was just fantastic. And that first tour, I was on 11th Squadron at RAF Leeming, which I still think is the greatest base in the UK in terms of geography, location, and what was around it. And the entire squadron basically lived in Harrogate.
Yeah.
So we're all living together. I mean, flying Tornadoes as kids. I look back, I just laugh at myself.
It's
now.
mad, isn't it? Absolutely.
Oh
mad.
my God. I thought I was the shit. And I was like, I look back now, like, what an idiot. And, I mean, I really didn't know what I didn't know. And, but it was that time where, this is like summer of 2001. So I hit the front line and bang, 9/11 happens. And all of a sudden you get really busy. So it was,
right.
depending on your perspective, I mean, your timing was incredible or disastrous, right? Because there's a lot of time away from home. But there are moments in my career I look back to, and that first tour on 11th Squadron was absolutely incredible. I loved it. I love the team. I love the airplane. I love the mission. And we were really busy on it. So it was really cool.
It was the best days, really. Think about it. I remember sitting at RAF Valley where you go to that advanced flying training. I remember just sitting there. I don't know how old it was, like 25 or something. And just having a beer at the end of the day and watching my mates come back into the circuit, break into the circuit. You remember that sort of buffet noise that the Hawks would make as they break into the circuit? Yeah. And just remember they're sat there and basking in the sunshine, going windsurf the next day, heading off to Manchester for a night out the next night. I mean, they were great days. I hope it's still the same. I don't know if it's still the same now going through flying training, but I hope it's
well. Look, they were great days when the weather was good, right? Yeah, I would describe Valley as a great. Funnily enough, a lot of my team are over at Valley right now, which stuff we'll talk about. They're all there, and one of my buddies is a Raptor pilot, and he works for me here at Red6. And like, you lived here for years. I haven't seen the sunshine in 10 days since he's over. Like, get used to it.
Right.
Yeah. But no, it was amazing. I remember the same thing, sitting at the bar watching the Hawks come in the end of the day, thinking, man, we are the luckiest people in the world doing this job.
Yeah, it was amazing days. Yeah, sure. And from there, you went through various, obviously, frontline tours, went off and did a thing called Tactical Leadership Program. And it was at the end of that one of your squadron boss, I think, gave you some fantastic news that you were going to be the first non-US citizen to go and fly the F-22 Raptor. In fact, I think he said, I've got a quote here, says that this exchange will change your life in ways that you don't even understand yet. So talk to us about that moment, Dan, and how that felt.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was a lot between hitting in the 11th Squadron and that. I mean, the first tour in 11th Squadron was really formative because we were so busy and stuff. And it was at the end of that tour that my boss came to me and actually said, look, I'm putting you forward for the QI course, the weapons instructor course. It's a weapons school to any US people out here listening. And, at the time, I don't think I'd even completed my first tour. So I was really, really early to go there. And I was reasonable with the airplane, but really not particularly experienced, given it was, first tour. So it was a real gamble for me to go to that school. I'm sure it was the same in the Sea Hire community, but everyone was terrified of that course. And rightly so. It's really, really difficult. So I go really early to that and managed to claw my way through the course with some grace from some wonderful instructors, and come back, and now I'm a QI on the Tornado. And it's funny because I came back and I was only back on 11th Squadron, and then that was the time when the squadrons were closing down, and then I was moved over to 25 Squadron, and I was actually out of the North Sea teaching a young pilot defensive BFM, something like that, and I actually really damaged my back, which took me out of flying for a good few months, actually. And there was a period of time where I thought I'd never actually fly again. And obviously Eurofighter was coming online at that point in time. And it was a really, really crazy moment for me, because I remember lying in hospital thinking I was pretty well placed to get one of the first Eurofighter cockpits. And if I couldn't fly, I was kind of excluded from it. And one of my buddies who I'd gone through the QI course with, great guy, Chris Layden, came in and told me he'd got the Typhoon cockpit. And I was sitting there thinking, I've gone from like being in pole position and think how, this is all set up for me to, I don't even going to fly again. And I love Chris, and he after Typhoon did great things and continues to this day. But I was devastated, right? I thought, oh my gosh, this is it for me. I remember my dad coming to see me, and he said something to me at the time, which I'll never forget, when I was probably at my lowest. And he said, look, don't worry. He's like, God's got bigger plans for you. And I couldn't have imagined what he meant. I get back to flying, there's rumors of exchanges coming up, and I think I'd applied for the F-18 exchange. And so the squadron's night flying, because I was again, maybe I did want to go fly F-18s off the carriers and join the Navy, but so I thought I'll go fly F-18s in the Navy, and that was it. And I was waiting for this announcement. So the squadron were night flying. The boss, JP, fantastic guy, brought the squadron in. He was debriefing. So why is everyone in the bar? And he calls the squadron to attention. And he does this big announcement. He's like, "You all know Dan went to the QI course, and it's really difficult, and blah, blah, blah. You work long hours, but you can expect some good deals. You know, he's applied for the F-18 exchange for the US Navy." And I thought, this is it. I'm going to the F-18. I'm in. And he said, "Well, on this occasion, he's been unsuccessful." And I had a pint of Guinness, and I was like, I was devastated. I really thought I was in for that exchange. And people started commiserating me. I said, I was thinking, why on earth would you do that publicly to me? Can you just bring me to a room and tell me? They let me sit with that for a while. And then he called the squadron to attention again. He said, "Hey guys, there's something else. There's a reason Dan hasn't got the F-18 exchange. And the reason he hasn't got the F-18 exchange is he's just been selected as the first ever non-American to go fly the F-22 Raptor." And I dropped my pint of Guinness, and then the squadron dived on me, beat the crap out of me. And I came to on the floor, and this is the story you talk about it. I looked up at him, and he was standing above me. He reached down and grabbed my hand, and I said to him, "Is it true?" He said, "It's true." I was kind of in shock, and he said something to me that was completely prophetic. He said, "Young man, this exchange is going to change your life in ways that you don't even know yet." Yeah. And boy, was he correct. And that was it. And 4 weeks later, I was off to fly the greatest air dominance platform the world has ever known, even to this day. I was off to America to fly Raptors. It was incredible.
An amazing aeroplane. If there's one aircraft I could fly, it would be an F-22. So I'm insanely jealous you've flown it. I mean, I remember the days in the test flights, and it was having all those issues, flight control issues and stuff. And there was one famous video, wasn't it, where it's sort of PIO type, or not even a PIO, some other type thing. But an incredible aeroplane, and like you say, even to this day, I mean, it's got one job, that aircraft, and I'm sure it does it bloody well. And in fact, another friend of mine is also flying a sort of 5th gen. Do we skip 4th gen, by the way? Or was 4th gen? I'm trying to think.
It's kind of like the Eagle,
Eagles, yeah, F-18, stuff like that, yeah.
Yes.
So my other buddy, Nathan, that flew the F-35 as a test pilot, I mean, he says that, what it's like to fly a fast jet, is a step up from anything that most pilots know. But he says what it's like to fly the F-35 is a sublime experience. That's how he sort of explains that 5th gen feel. How would you explain the sort of how that feels compared to flying an F3?
Oh, I mean, flying F3. I mean, I always joked at the time I might as well have been the captain of Starship Enterprise. I mean, there's so much about Raptor that is incredible, right? It's all the stuff. I mean, it was designed to be an air dominance platform initially. I mean, it does a bunch of other stuff, right? But it's very capable of dropping bombs and doing a bunch of air to ground stuff. But primary role is to go in the airspace and kill anything in there. So it's this unique combination of unrivaled maneuverability, the ability to super cruise. It can do Mach 1.5 without using afterburners. The sensor fusion, the avionics. It was a 910G airplane, and to this day, I mean, is just completely unrivaled. It will, I mean, dominate anything in the sky. I mean, by orders of magnitude. And the Raptor is obviously known on training exercises and things like that, but the Raptor operationally and what it really does is it's just an incredible machine. So to go from the F3 was, I mean, I always talk about this, the F3 in full afterburner. I think I'm dragging this out of my memory here, but it had 33,000 pounds of thrust in full afterburner, and that was a fast airplane.
Yeah.
Each engine in the F-22 had 35,000 pounds of thrust. So it went 33,000 pounds to 70,000 pounds of thrust.
Really?
And an airplane that would pull 10 Gs all day long and not blink an eye. It was incredible. And of course, it's a stealth asset. So, you could go to a piece of airspace and go in there, and it changed the rules of the game because you wouldn't really fly. Mutual support was not really a thing. Mutual support, across massive azimuth now became a thing, and the ability to dominate airspace, massive swathes of airspace, and operate autonomously. They really changed how we thought about doing air dominance. And the first time I flew it was I mean, funnily enough, the guy that taught me to fly it now works here at Red6, retired two-star Fumez.
That's
Amazing
awesome.
guy. He's my instructor, and we go off on the first ride. And the first time you fly the Raptor is the first time you fly the Raptor. And
Right.
I was the first non-American, but I was like one of the very early guys as well. I mean, the airplane wasn't operational, and so we're still kind of all learning about it together. He goes, taxis onto the runway, taxis onto the runway, no afterburners for takeoff on the first thing. And I used to, in the Tornado, I'd stack my flight reference cards here in the cowling. And
Yeah,
so
right.
Fumez goes rolling off, right? I let the brakes go, and I'm nailed into the back of the seat. And the flight reference cards go flying. They get stuck in my visor here somehow, fall down in front of me on my first takeoff. And I'm airborne. This thing is like, holy God, it's so powerful. And I'm blind within like 10 seconds of my flight lead on my first ride in the Raptor. And thankfully, the radar just sees everything. So I look down, find him, put him in the shoot list, and off I go. And I'm just ripping up to the gods at 400 knots in mil power, just continuing to pull the nose up like this. It was just an incredible experience.
It
And that was
sounds
my
like
first ride. So,
sounds like a rocket. Literally, it sounds like
it
one of
was,
Elon's
I mean,
rockets. Yeah.
it was unbelievable. I mean, they said the service ceiling was 60,000 feet, and I am Mach 2, and it would go way faster and way higher than that. So it was a beast for sure.
I am very, very envious of you flying that. I mean, but most people that would love to just go and fly in any fast jet, just get in a Hawk or something would be like, I just want to go and fly in a Hawk. But that's like going from a PA-38 Tomahawk in a Hawk to the F-22. It's like flying a Starship Enterprise. Like, it sounds
Yeah, it is.
incredible.
No, it's just,
Yeah.
it's just the king of the skies. I was incredibly lucky. And when I think back and, coming for this kid from Hartlepool that used to wear his underpants on top of his trousers and try to take off, I'm like, now all of a sudden I'm sitting in controls of a Raptor. And it wasn't just the airplane, it was just the timing. That first year in particular on the Raptor, where we were all brand new and the US Air Force had gone out and hand selected everyone to go to that airplane. So the talent level on the aircraft was just extraordinary, and just
Yeah, right.
the best human beings, the most capable fighter pilots in the world, and the culture. We just had everything, all of the resource, all of the media. It was such an exciting time to be alive and flying as a fighter pilot. I was just privileged, and so I went to the 27th Fighter Squadron at Langley, and they put me through the instructor work up there, and all of a sudden I'm teaching on the Raptor at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Living my
That is
best life.
amazing. How old are you at this
Huge,
stage, Dan?
huge privilege. I think I was 29 when I hit the Raptor, and
Isn't that mental? Yeah.
I think back 29 years old. I didn't know anything at the time, and continued my education. Just I was surrounded by really, really talented people that really helped develop me, and I learned so much. Just immensely capable fighter pilot, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful time to be on the squadron.
Everything in the US just seems so much cooler by orders of magnitude. I don't know why that is. It isn't necessarily, but it does seem that way to the outsider. I mean, I've got lots of mates who,
Yeah, they don't have pubs over here though. We've always got pubs in
True.
the UK.
Yeah, true. In fact, my mate Scrambag, who did go on an F-18 exchange, who I interviewed a couple of years ago now, I said to him, "What's better? What would you rather have? Flying the F-18 from a US carrier or flying a GR9 from a UK carrier?" He says, "Well, I'd like the ethos and the flying that you get in the US off the carriers with the Wardroom bar on the ship and British pubs."
Right. That's pretty.
If I could combine those two things, that'll be it.
Yeah, exactly that. And I did miss the British banter, but the guys are amazing. And I think one of the things I took away that I say with absolute sincerity, which really, really taught me a tremendous amount. Firstly, the definition of patriots, they really did continue to absolutely love and cherish their country and are really protective. And being the cynical Brits when we come over here, so it's like this US jingoism. And I'm an American now, so I can speak about it. But,
and it's a US election today as well, so
yeah,
good time to be talking about it. Yeah.
Yes, look, I mean, but that became infectious, and the standards they drove towards perfection every single day. Often, obviously, it was elusive, but the standards they held themselves and everyone around them to was, yes, they had the best airplane in the world. Yes, they were immensely capable fighter pilots. We were very lucky. Everyone was very experienced, but the professional standards and attention to detail was palpable, and that just became, absolutely infectious. And it really is a thing, because that they drove to such a high standard. It was just wonderful. And you'd go into a piece of airspace with 4 Raptors looking across at the 3 guys in formation with you and thinking, oh, it's on. They were amazing operators.
Fantastic. But and also one of the other things that the US do very well is call signs, and I know that you got your own call sign. What was your call sign, Dan? And I want to know. I've got an idea of how it might come about, but how did you get it?
Well, it depends who you talk to, what the call sign means, because there's always a double entendre to everything, right?
Yeah.
But so we'll park that one for now. But in essence, right, look, I was briefed into the most classified program in the United States Air Force. I was, padded by the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. So they were clearly you're a British spy. We shouldn't. And actually, there was a serious undertone to that because a lot of the people were not happy that I was on the platform, particularly given how early it was in the early days. So, of course, I get the call sign Bond, and you don't get any say. It's just a massive hazing ceremony. You pound a bunch of drinks all night long, and the next morning you wake up and you've been given a call sign. So that's how it came to pass. And there's another meaning behind it, which I'll tell you over beer sometime.
Roger. It does. You have a little bit of a Sean Connery sort of sound and look to you. I mean, obviously we're chatting now, so maybe there's a future there. If everything else doesn't work out, or you sell your business, maybe there's a movie role for you there, or even a real life role.
Maybe we'll see.
All good things have to come to an end, though, Dan. And typically a tour of in the military is about 3 years. So it was about 3 years later in 2009. And you'd fall in love with this sort of flying. And how did you then come to the decision to say, well, that's it now? I've flown the F3. I've been the first non-US pilot to go and fly the Raptor. It's time to do something else. What brought that about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a number of layers to that question, really, and it really gets into sort of what was going on in my personal life and my family as well at the time. But so, look. Firstly, when I signed to come on the exchange, my return of service was 3 years return of service after completing the Raptor TX course. So the contract I signed was do 3 years of service. Now that was, I think, a typo or a mistake by the RAF at the time. But so basically, I had an option to leave right after the F-22. And being completely honest, I was reasonable. As a fighter pilot, I was okay. But I wasn't really good in the military. I really didn't fit well in the military because I just hated being controlled and told what to do. And I just was kind of anti-authority, and it just wasn't me. So I always knew it was never like a life thing for me. And I really very much like to be in control of my own destiny. And so when I looked at it, I thought, look, I've really hit the pinnacle here in terms of flying Raptors on exchange. I was a QI course, weapons school graduate. I'd flown F3s. We done ops, all that kind of stuff. I thought about the Reds. It was the one thing that was maybe interesting to me, but I really had fallen in love with the United States. But actually sitting in the background to that was a lot of stuff going on with my family, and my dad was really struggling with mental health, and I tried to keep that a secret from everyone. I mean, he was really, really struggling, desperately ill. And certainly on the last year on my Raptor tour, specifically the last 6 months, it became overwhelmingly difficult for me to manage. He came over to see me a few times, and he was, I mean, honestly, threatening to take his own life, suicidal, really struggling with a lot of stuff. And that was really having a massive impact on my own mental health. And so at that point in time, I realized I was becoming unwell myself, and just with the magnitude of everything that was going on. But I was trying to keep it private. I was, in the midst of this exchange tour and all that kind of stuff, and trying to deal with really terrible family situation. And so I realized I didn't want to go back to the UK. I needed to sort of take care of myself for a while, and I wanted something, completely fresh start. So I had fallen in love with the US, and I wanted to be able to give more time to, my family and sort of help focus on being there for my dad in ways that he needed. So I elected to make the decision to leave, which was difficult, but I think ultimately the right choice for me. So what next? I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do really, except I knew I wanted to live in New York. So it was one of those kind of entrepreneurial jumps you make, which is terrifying, where you leave, you don't know what you're going to do, but you kind of back yourself to figure it out. And so I elected to go to grad school. So I was lucky enough to get into Georgetown over here and went up to do my MBA. I met some amazing people during that time and really I figured that would sort of really take this background I'd had in the RAF military in the UK, US Air Force perspective, complement that with a really good academic education in business, world-class university. So I went through Georgetown, graduated in 2010, and then moved to New York and got a job in finance in New York. And New York City was everything that it always promised to be to me. And I absolutely adored that city, and built a tremendous network of friends there. Fell in love with my other passion in life, which was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and just happened to live around the corner from the greatest Jiu-Jitsu MMA academy in the world, the Renzo Gracie Academy. And so I started studying under Renzo Gracie, and that became a lifelong journey. But I absolutely detested my job. And so I'd gone from obviously the cockpit of things that we've flown, where you're surrounded by the best human beings and just having a great time, and to living and working in corporate America, chasing the dollar, which was, seemingly a really big salary, having come from the military and everything. But I was absolutely miserable. I hated every second of it. And so I was really thinking about, like, what do I need to do? And this gets me through to November of 2011 now, where you get the curveball that life throws at you now and again, where you just don't expect. And so I talked about my dad, and he had started a business in this town where we'd grown up in the northeast of England, and that business had gone on to be a pretty substantial employer. So we had around about 200 employees. It was in construction and development, and he was struggling. And it was the wake of the financial crisis, and obviously the UK government at the time had gone through austerity, so public sector spending had stopped, and the company was heavily focused on public sector spending, and the company was in a lot of trouble. And my dad was really struggling with mental illness, and he called me up and he said, "Son, I'm lost." He's like, "I really need help. Can you come back and help me?" And this was a Monday night, and I'd had a broken shoulder from fighting and jiu-jitsu, so I was due to get the stitches out. So I said to him, "Dad, the answer is yes, of course, I'll come back." And that was no easy decision for me, because I had a really tumultuous relationship with my dad. But of course, he was asking for my help. And when I looked at him, I saw this kind of little boy, asking for help. And so I said, "Yes, I'll come back. I'll be on the first flight tomorrow. I have to go to the hospital. So I'll be back with you on Wednesday." And the last thing he said to me that night on the phone was, "Son, I'm not sure that's going to be soon enough." And I thought he was referring to the business. And so we, ordinarily on Skype calls, we'd hang up, and my dad's tech was not his strong suit, right? And so I was waiting for him to hang up, and something compelled me to watch him for a few more minutes. And I don't know what it was, but I just watched him when he thought he'd hung up, and I watched him pottering around looking for his glasses, in this crazy vest. He looked like this crazy man, but he looked so sad and lost. And I went to bed that night thinking I got to go back and help him. And so I went to bed, woke up the next morning, and I woke up the next morning and opened my laptop, and I had a string of emails in my laptop. Call me really quickly. And I woke up to the news that night I'd gone to bed, and my dad had taken his own life and committed suicide that night. And it's sorry, it catches you out, right? You think you're good with it every now and again, and you kind of struggle, but it just flipped my life upside down. You can imagine. And he was gone, and I called home, and I had my mom and 3 sisters, and a company that was bankrupt and in real trouble. And I knew at that moment in my life I'd arrived at an intersection where, I talk about this often with Steve Jobs in his, I think, Stanford commencement speech. He talks about connecting the dots in your life, and that you have to believe in a passion, right? And it's very hard to connect the dots looking forward in your life. But at some point in your life, you'll arrive at an intersection where you have the right experience or right combination of experience and education and connection and friendships and all the stuff you need. And suddenly those dots will connect and you'll look forward on a path that you're saying you're supposed to walk down.
Yeah.
And that moment in November of 2011 was that moment in time for me. And I had the right experience, the right education, the right friends, all that kind of stuff to do what was being asked of me. The question was, did I have the character to walk into what was going to be the most difficult chapter of my life? And so the answer, of course, was I had to do it. So I jumped on a flight home and walked into what is hard to describe in terms of an experience. You can imagine walking into my house and my mom and my sisters, the press were all around the house, and the police were there, and it was just chaos. And I'd obviously lost my dad, and the police said, we need someone to identify your dad's body, and I didn't want anyone else to have to do it. So just give me a second, let me get a shower, and I'll go to the hospital and do it. And so I did that, went to the hospital and walked in and saw, I had a very kind of like really special moment in my life that I remember distinctly that firmed up my belief system in God, certainly, and what happens next. In that I was presented with my dad, but I was looking at him, of course, lying there, but I realized it wasn't him. And there was an energy in the room at the time that was so visceral that it compelled me to look to my right. And I felt this energy that I actually tangibly, I could reach out and touch. And that was my dad. And I spoke to that energy. And excuse my profanity, but I said to him, you really fucked this up. I was like, but I said, I promise I'm not going to let you down. And I'll take care of the family. I'll take care of the business. I won't leave until it's done. And then I left and went home to see my mom and my sisters, and called the company up and spoke to the managers and said, look, I have the whole company in tomorrow, 200 people. I need to speak. And I sat up that night thinking about what I was going to say to all of these people, and how I would inspire them to follow us follow me on a journey that was going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult, because I just inherited a business that was basically bankrupt, in deep trouble. And I got them in a room, and you can imagine these people I'd grown up with from being a kid, that have known me for 30 something years, but I had largely vanished. I hadn't seen me in a long time. Big burly builders down to young kids that had joined us as apprentices and everything. I said, look, we're a family business, and you guys have had, certain access to my family. We're basically this family ethos, but there's been limits, and there's rumors flying around. But the truth is, my dad had struggled with a lifelong battle with manic depression, and yesterday morning he took his life, and I'm here now, and I'm here to tell you that I know exactly how to get us out of the precarious position we're in as a business. And I always laugh because I had no idea how to get us out of that precarious position as a business. I said, but the next 6 months are in essence going to be the biggest battle of our professional careers, and it all comes down to what we decide to do today together as a team. So I'd like you to think about the history of this company, everything that's gone before you, what this company stood for, the values that my dad stood for in the company, what we've done in the community. We're a very embedded company in the community. We had a great social outreach. And I said, it's going to involve a lot of sacrifice, but my mandate to you is apprentices, I'm going to ask you to sacrifice. Your managers, I'm going to ask you to sacrifice more. Directors, I'm going to ask you to sacrifice even more. And I'm going to sacrifice more than any of you. And we're going to get to work. And with that, I could kind of galvanize the team in that moment. And it was the moment where we either came together as a team or we fell apart, right? So I galvanized them. I said, right, let's get to work. And then I went into the room with the chief financial officer, Jeanette, who I loved, and it was my father's goddaughter, and said, let me look at the accounts. I looked at the P&L and the balance sheet. I was like, oh God, it really is bad. And so we had to get to work. And I left New York City. and everything that was there that I loved. And I moved in on the top floor of my mom's house with her at age 35. And every night I listened to my mom cry herself to sleep. And every morning I forced myself to get up and go to work and lead this company. I was shattered and heartbroken as a human being myself, as you can imagine. So the leadership challenge there was, in instance, like just how do you do it? How do you need it? How do you need an elephant one bite at a time? And it was get up, make your bed. That's a win. Get in the shower, get clean. That's a win. Get breakfast. That's a win. Go to work before anyone else. Be in work early before everyone else, and that's a win. And moment by moment, I led this company through 5 incredibly difficult years on the pathway to a transformation, and ultimately got it there and helped the family heal, and took care of everyone, probably except myself, if I'm being truthful. I ultimately got to an outcome where we ultimately got the company to an exit, which was great for everyone. I protected the livelihoods of a lot of people, a lot of pensions. I took care of my family. I eventually had a mother-son talk, which was a tough love conversation, and said, look, Dad's not coming back. You need to move on with your life. Here's a website. It's called eHarmony. I need you to go on and find love. And she went on there, went on one date, met a guy, fell in love. But that was a great success. But when she did that, I realized it was my time to move on now. And so I'm telling the story because we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but I took my mom and to her and said, look, I'm tired, and I really kind of need to take care of myself now. And you've met George, a wonderful man, and the business is good. Can I go? And she started crying. She gave me a hug, and she said, thank you so much. She said, go. And I had no idea, but I knew I had to come back to the States. So I moved back to New York City. And I kind of been trying to keep my life alive there for 5 years. And I moved back to New York with no game plan, just 2 bags. And I got back into jiu-jitsu, and the city I loved, but it was the city I loved was no more because it was associated with so much trauma for me at the time. It was the last time I'd seen my dad alive together. It was, the last time I'd been in love with someone was there. And I really didn't have a purpose, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I reached out to a friend I'd met on my travels in the previous 5 years, who was a producer in LA. And I said, what are you up to? Do you mind if I come visit for a while? And he said, sure, come on over. And so I packed 2 bags, told my mom I was moving to California, and off I went and landed in Los Angeles, and started the next chapter of my life. So that's probably enough for me to stop talking, take a sip of coffee.
Please do, Dan.
You ask questions, yeah.
I say when we chatted before, as we arranged this episode before this recording today, I watched you chat about your dad, and I had to stop the video. As an outsider watching it, incredibly emotive. And I think when we haven't even spoken about what you're doing now, but when you look back on your life and all of the endeavor and achievements, and this is for me, I haven't heard as much as we're going to talk about with Red6, but this has got to be your biggest achievement, and how you supported your family and supported all of those other families, and the effect that will have had on everyone else, and pick yourself up through it as well, because that's just, I can't even begin to imagine how that felt. And thank you so much for taking the time to share that. And I think mental health certainly there's always been a bit of a stigma attached to it, particularly for men as well, and I can imagine someone like your father who's, as you say, in a community and setting up a business that's a sizable business, employing those people. And if you are somebody that has mental illness, then that's going to be tough. If you look back on it now, Dan, is there anything that you've taken away from it that's taking you forward now?
So much, yeah, for sure. I talk about it candidly and openly. Mental health is something that should be widely discussed, and certainly, I think there was a stigma attached to it for a long time. Particularly amongst men, right? And particularly men like from our backgrounds, where we want to talk about. So my dad wouldn't talk about it, right? I pleaded with him to get help. for years and years and years. I mean, I remember sobbing, like crying my eyes out the way he'd tell me he was fine, he didn't need help and all that kind of stuff. And you could see him. I was just losing him. I was just losing him one bit at a time. And I could see him, vanishing. I went in the absolute opposite direction. And for me, I grew up in a tumultuous upbringing, as you can probably imagine, given the background I talked about with my dad. And it certainly impacted me. It was something that I kind of kept hidden for years and years and years as I was going through my own professional career. And I would hide from it through achievement. And it's a really dangerous double-edged sword there, because the likes of you and I are those driven individuals that will achieve and achieve and achieve. But I, it was really the benefit of hindsight. I look back at it now, it's like I was hiding. I was a scared kid. Even as an adult, I was a scared kid. And I was hiding from it all until the end of my Raptor exchange was when I really started to take ownership of that and really realized I needed to help myself, just dealing with what was going on with my own family and my dad and my own upbringing. And so I committed to therapy, and it's been a bedrock of my life ever since. I mean, I do it on a regular basis, weekly basis. And to me, I just think of it as like going to the gym now. And it's a
100%.
It's a continuous piece of work. And it has I've emancipated myself from the kind of shackles of what went before me. And it's never a work complete, right? It's always a work in progress, but it absolutely saved my own life. And it really transformed me and allowed me to come to a degree of acceptance about what had happened to me as a kid. And so on and so forth. And all the way through that transformation of my father's business, I would go to therapy every single week without fail. There are periods I'd be away, and of course all that kind of stuff, but it's been a bedrock and a pillar of my own life that has allowed me to heal and function. And when you carry trauma, and the trauma, certainly the extent of trauma that I'm not alone, that I've been through, my father went through, and there are people that are far worse off than we've been. The need for that support is so apparent, and there is absolutely zero shame in saying you need help. And that would be the message I would say to everyone. I take help every single week. It's critically important for me. It allows me to function, and no longer should be ashamed, stigmatized, any of that stuff. For people out there that are struggling with stuff, how deadly and pernicious it can be. Go talk to someone. It's critical, and it's actually something that I will ultimately come back to as we go through this podcast in terms of how I'm thinking about it myself.
Yeah, thanks. So I've never really shared it, certainly not shared it on a podcast, but I've spoken to someone as well. It doesn't happen regularly at the moment. If I needed to, I'd go back and I'd chat to somebody. I think it's really powerful to hear somebody that's achieved as much as you've achieved, and hopefully people that know me might think of, as you say, high achievers, but then what are you masking in the background? How else is it affecting you? And that's a really positive message. So go and get some help and just chat through it. And it's not what you think it is. That's what struck me, actually. When you go and chat to somebody, it's totally different to what you think. And people are asking you questions, you're like, so I've never really thought about that before. I really thought about how that affected me, or how that might affect somebody else as well. And and viewing things in a completely different way. And that's led me on a journey, actually, of listening to other podcasts, particularly people like Gabor Mate, and these people are listening to generational, trauma and how things have affected, the family members, how it affects you. So yeah, it's really powerful. So thank you so much, Dan, for pushing that positive message. This ultimately took you on this journey, didn't it, to free up your mind, taking in some surfing. I mean, as if you didn't get any cooler, Mr. Bond. You're now surfing on the West Coast.
Well, I don't know if I would describe it as surfing in those days. I fell in a lot. I didn't get it much, but I tried, yeah.
But that sort of freed up your mind, it seems. This sort of, I'm going to get out of New York, I'm just going to go and sit on a surfboard for a while. And that seems to sort of free up your mind at that stage.
Yeah, it did. Like, I mean, there was a few interludes when I came to LA. I actually, funnily enough, I decided I needed something to scare myself and make friends and build community and all that kind of stuff. So I actually went to acting school for a while and tried that. And just,
I knew it. Yeah. I knew it.
It discovered pretty quickly.
It's going to happen, Dan. I tell you what, I need to be your manager if this does happen. Okay. Can I please be your manager? Right. Yeah,
For
cheers.
sure, for sure. But no, I ended up, booking a few fun things, which was interesting, but a great insight. I made a bunch of friends doing that, but ultimately, it ultimately wasn't what I was going to do. And it was just a way to ingratiate myself and scare myself and grow as a human being, right? So I ultimately started surfing, and I'd spend a lot of time alone in the ocean, particularly in the evenings. You get some epic sunsets out in California. And I'd spend a lot of time thinking about losing my dad the way I did. Really crystallized the value of time to me, right? And I started thinking about like time and money and all that stuff. And it occurred to me that all the time in the world with no money is really difficult, but all the money in the world with no time is literally worthless, right? So there's a blend of value proposition. There's somewhere of a balance. And so I started asking myself really fundamental questions of who am I as a human being? How do I want to live as truthfully as possible? And I came to the conclusion that I only wanted to work on problems that I'm really passionate about, that I think are important to humanity. And secondly, I would only work with people I really love, whose values closely aligned to my own. And so I was like, okay, well, what am I passionate about? What I love? Well, clearly I've been flying airplanes since I was 14. So it's got something to do with flying. And I started thinking about national security and this intersection of national security and flying, and going back to the idea of training. And so now this is in the 2016, 17 timeframe. And when I'm sure you can identify this in the sea area, right? So same in the tornado, we would really struggle to get opposition to train against red air, right? So we'd spend half our time flying red air in the UK, which is a complete waste of time, providing training that was subpar at best, right? If we're being kind, it was just nowhere near what we need to be doing. When I went to the Raptor, I thought things would be different. I'm on the preeminent fighter in the world. I'm in the US Air Force, so much money. And once I'd gone through the instructor work on the Raptor, it was exactly the same problem, just a different scale. We couldn't get training. So when I started looking at training, I realized we fundamentally had a supply and demand problem. So you've got a massive demand signal for training. You've got a chronic undersupply. And there is no way of solving that problem, right? And so when you ask why, you start digging into, when we say training, what do we have? We have three, what I would say, are subsets of problems with training. We have a production problem. We can't, produce enough pilots to get to the front line quickly enough. We have an absorption problem, not being able to get enough pilots up to speed on the front line. And then we have an experience problem, getting pilots that are semi-useful and going into combat, right? And all three of those are problems for us. Why do we have that problem? Well, we can't produce parts enough quickly enough. We haven't got enough parts, are all leaving. The US alone has gone from, I think, 134 combat squadrons, in Gulf War I down to 57 frontline combat squadrons. So we haven't got the squadrons, we haven't got the manpower, we haven't got the assets. But even if we did, we haven't got the dollars to solve, right? It's really expensive. So even if we did, look, when I was on the Raptor, we started to even think back then around the pivot away from the war on terror to the peer adversary. So we started looking at like the reemergence of Russia onto the world stage as a state actor, and certainly the rise of China as a preeminent, global competitor to the US. And so even if we could solve all of those problems, we had no way of training to modern peer adversaries, platforms like J20. It's only gotten a whole bunch worse since I've left, right? So the definition of insanity is repeating the same mistakes of the past and expecting different results, right? We're just never going to solve this training crisis, trying to use physical assets and pilots to provide adversaries to train against. So I started studying, like, well, what does that mean? So the US Air Force had obviously identified the same problem, and they started pioneering some work in something called live virtual constructive. And the idea with live virtual constructive was, can we blend live pilots in live airplanes, live, with virtual pilots and simulators on the ground, but we beam them up into the air, and the aircraft sensors think there's something out there to detect. In essence, constructive is the same idea, but it's AI-driven algorithms, not human flow and simulators, right? So we mesh all of this together to be able to provide synthetic worlds outside that we can train against. And that pioneering work was done by Air Force Research Laboratory under a program called SLATE out here in the US. And when I looked at that, it struck me that was the only way that we would solve the training crisis of the future. But it was a 50% solution. It was a 50% solution because it only worked in the beyond visual range environment, and not within visual range environment. And so what would happen is you could trick the aircraft sensors into thinking there's something out there, but the moment you got to that sort of 15-mile range where you transition from the proverbial sort of chess player to you put in the gum shield and you go for the fist fight and doing all the visual moving that we know and love, then the whole training ecosystem would collapse. Why is that? Because there's no way of visually putting an entity into the field of view of the pilots and having it behave in a manner commensurate with a real airplane flown by a real pilot. Why is that? Well, to do that, you'd have to make the technology augmented reality work outdoors in dynamic environments up in the sky. No one had been able to do that at the time. So when I looked at LVC, I was like, look, you either train pilots in real airplanes flown against other pilots in real airplanes. We can't do that. We know that it's never going to work. You can put them in simulators, which is a 50% kind of solution. Sims are good for some things, but there's nothing like pulling 9Gs and running out of fuel. All the stuff you and I know, you don't think the same way when you're in a passenger cockpit, right? So you got to do it for real. The question is, how do you do it for real efficiently? And LVC is the only way that will solve this paradigm or this problem. So, but LVC, if it only works BVR and not within visual range, is not a realizable solution, because it's not just that we focus on the within visual range training, but the problem is that the whole training ecosystem doesn't make sense if your flow decisions don't make sense, because you time out a missile or an AMRAAM, whatever it is you're shooting, but that guy's still alive and you got to go do something about him. Well, if he's still alive for real and you can't do anything about him, then your decisions are completely different, right? And you extrapolate that across a large force, and now the whole fight doesn't make sense. But if you could solve that within visual range piece now, not only do you have the building blocks for the ability to train pilots in a fundamentally different way, but you have the missing piece of the LVC ecosystem, which means now an LVC ecosystem is a future in which we can train definitively at the frequency we need, at the scale and numbers we need, wherever we are, whoever we're with, and to relevant peer threats, because it's just code. So the overall vision I came up with was complete the LVC ecosystem. And then every day of the week that Dan and Andrew go out and taxi out in their airplanes, we're doing what we should do for real, which is flying blue air. And there's a future in which all of red air is delivered synthetically outdoors. Amazing. So let me double down on that. What am I talking about? I'm talking about dragging simulation and making it work outside. So you get the best of live flight. We're physically in our airplanes, looking out of the window, and we create simulated worlds up in the sky with entities that we can visually see and interact with. And that was the genesis of the idea for Red6. The question is, how do I do it? Right. And so began the journey of Red6. So I'll probably pause there and take a sip of coffee so you can ask some questions.
Yeah, please. So if I'm keeping it, because I'm a bit simple with things like this. So I would go take it back in a day. So I'd launch me and a mate in a Sea Harrier, and then there'd be another couple of mates in Sea Harriers. Occasionally it might be you guys in your F3s or some other aircraft, maybe even US F-15s, but we were typically fighting aircraft that we knew. We knew the tactics, we knew how the aircraft would perform, we knew their WESs, their weapon engagement zones, and but most of the time it was usually similar aircraft. It was Sea Harriers fighting Sea Harriers. And like you say, very difficult, very expensive. But then if I was, flying an F-22 against a J-20 from China, how am I going to train myself for that? So for the listeners out there, and please do obviously correct me, Dan, but we've got, I think most people know what artificial intelligence is. So we could have an aircraft thinking for itself, if you like, through coding and all of that stuff. We've got virtual reality, which would be purely virtual. So maybe someone with a headset on, one of those headsets in that virtual space. But what you've done is, and what you're working on, is this ability to put yourself in a real aeroplane, fighting against an aircraft that is virtual, that has essentially artificial intelligence. And this is then called augmented reality. So we're in that real aircraft, pulling real G, pressing all the real switches, feeling like we're in there, but we're fighting this virtual aircraft. And I've seen some of this. I hope that's correct, mate, please. And I've seen the videos, and they're absolutely incredible what's happening. I mean, I because I've done it, obviously I can see the massive benefits of this. And what amazes me about it all is that you've come up with this idea, albeit so the US Air Force were working with this simulator program, but you've come up with like all great ideas. It's an idea like, why has no one else thought about this? Why has no one else done this? I think there were a couple of guys doing something similar, weren't there, in cars with a thing called virtual drift. It was similar, but not quite the same. Is that right?
Yeah, so you're scratching at the surface of what it is, that the problem that we've solved, right? So let's level set for everyone that's listening. So the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality. Virtual, as you rightly said, is I put a headset on, and I could be in an entirely different world somewhere else, right? The entire environment is virtual. So I could put myself, as you've seen in simulators on the ground, I could put a VR headset on and be in a virtual F-22, and I used to look around, it looks
Yeah.
like an F-22. Augmented reality is a much more difficult, much more nuanced problem to solve, because with augmented reality, we aim to put virtual entities into the real world around us. So we have to understand the real world around us, so the entity we build synthetically can take its place in a realistic fashion, and that's a very, very difficult problem to solve.
Yeah.
So how to do it? When I started Red 6, I was building this airplane, right, which became a stupid idea. Don't ever build your own airplane. But
Cool looking
I started
airplane, by the
building
way.
this. It's cool, yeah. They're really cool. I met a gentleman named Dave Ronenberg, and it's a that's a story in itself. I can share if you wish. But I started building this airplane called a Berkut, which became the test airplane for the company, one of two. And into my life one day, serendipitously walked a gentleman named Glenn Snyder, who became one of the co-founders of the business. And Glenn had pulled off a world first in 2015 in virtual reality. So a completely virtual environment. He took two Mustangs cars, put them on separate racetracks, put a real driver in each of them. One of them was the Steg from Top Gear. So the Brits will
Right.
appreciate that. Ben Collins, and then put them both in a virtual reality headset. So they were blind to the outside world. They met each other in a volcanic molten ash world. And even though they're in different locations, they raced against each other around this virtual racetrack. And when I saw that, I was like, huh, Glenn, do you think that's possible in airplanes? He said, got our heads together for a while. Yep, we think so. Technically more difficult, but we think we could probably do that. Okay, do you think it's possible in augmented reality, not virtual reality? Because no one in their right mind would allow us to fly fighter jets in virtual reality. That's blind to the outside world. Although we'd love to try it, I'm sure. And Glenn looked at me as if I was an idiot at the time, which I guess, like any entrepreneur, you largely are when you have a vision and no technical backing with it to back it up. And he said no. And I said, why? He said, because augmented reality as a technology doesn't work outdoors or in dynamic environments. And so the 5-year-old fighter pilots just kept asking why, until we
Yeah.
kind of came up with a thesis that we figured might work. And that was leveraging some of the lessons they'd learned in virtual drift to apply to how we approached augmented reality in a fundamentally different way. And I told Glenn, look, we better figure this out, because I've just promised the Air Force we can do this, and we've got a demo in whatever month it was, November, something, 2017 or 18 or 19, way back in the day. And so with that, we kind of got to work on building this technology stack, which was really crappy, a tech demonstrator, into this airplane that I happened to be building at the time. The two came together, and the airplane became the first test platform for this technology stack. And so I took it to the Air Force Research Laboratory and said, hey, your work in LVC, it's fantastic, but I think I can solve the within visual range piece for you. And they said to us, this is in 2017, they said, guys, we've been looking for this for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Is this possible? Because we can't find anyone in the world that can do this. And like any good entrepreneur with a PowerPoint and not much else, I said, of course it's possible. Trust me. And they said, okay, we'll prove it to us in a demo in November. I think it might have been 2019, but by the time we got through to that demo, and we did, and we proved on the ground that our thesis, at least our approach to AR, would work. We put it into a cockpit. The airplane wasn't finished. I didn't even have an engine on the back. I had to borrow an engine, so it looked semi-credible. And we put them in there, and we had this like really crappy tech stack that we were so proud of, but at least showed our technical approach, and it was enough for the Air Force to say, this is interesting. We're going to back you with some research money, which we called SIBA grant funding over here. And we got to work building what we refer to as ATARs. And at the time, no one gave us a chance, right? So no one believed it was possible. Those that kind of listened to me pitch numerous briefings all over the country. But I was left off stage by incumbents in the space that were in the helmet mounted queuing space, all that kind of stuff. It's the kind of classical disruptive technology story of no one believes you until
Right.
you go build it. But what I understood then was, if this was possible, I was going to bring a new market into the world that didn't exist, because the technology stack was not just the enabling technology for the broader LVC ecosystem and how we train to the high-end fight, but going right back to those subsets of problems of like, how do we produce pilots? It has equal applicability to those subsets. So for you and I as fighter pilots, once we've learned to fly an airplane, we rarely fly by ourselves, right? We've always got another wingman with an instructor, which involves an airplane, an instructor, fuel, supply chain, everything that goes with it.
Money,
And
expense.
my thesis, yeah, exactly. And my thesis was, well, now you don't need those anymore. If I can replace that entity with an augmented reality entity, which we can, then the value proposition is a higher quality of training, much faster through the training pipeline, at a fraction of the cost in a safer environment because there's less to bump into. And the ancillary benefits of the impact of carbon emissions and offsets are enormous. So I understood what I was bringing into the world. And when people scoffed me, I remained steadfast in thinking I am building a new market that no one's thinking about right now. And so that slowly but surely over the past 7 years now it has started to build traction all the way through to where we are today.
I think there's one of those demos I saw somewhere that you'd had about 6 hours sleep over 5 days or something. Everything was breaking that you wanted to work. Like any sort of thing, you've got a meeting, you've got to try and sell this project, and anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But you obviously pulled it off. How do you, again, both sort of entrepreneurial, though yours is somewhat more exciting than delivering training courses, Dan. But how do you go about worrying about protecting this idea? And I mean, presumably you're so far on now that it's very difficult for somebody else to catch up because you're in it, right? You've done it. But how do you go about protecting it? Do you worry about that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm fairly relaxed about it, right? Because rising tides lift all ships. So competition's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But we thought about this a long time ago, and we were really thoughtful and really strategic in how we file patents. So we have a very, very comprehensive patent portfolio, right? Patents are one thing, though. The best way to succeed is go faster and be better than anyone else.
Absolutely.
And I think to be absolutely honest, we're kind of one of one in the world right now because everyone kind of didn't believe it was possible. And it's very, very, very difficult to do what we're doing. And because we are so single focused on this use case, augmented reality had experienced as an industry some major headwinds right out there because there were big notable companies like Microsoft, like Magic Leap that raised billions of dollars and tried to bring augmented reality into the world as the next big thing. And I think they're right, but they were too early and they chased a consumer market that didn't exist.
Right.
Whereas one of the single biggest things we focused on is finding a use case for augmented reality and a use case that is an acutely defined pain point for the militaries around the world, where only augmented reality can solve that problem. So that's kind of been our secret sauce and being so steadfast and so focused on the use case that we've anchored our entire engineering effort around it. And we're a relatively small, the company's growing, agile, highly focused, highly disciplined team that is working really, really, really quickly. So do I worry about competition? The competition at some point will inevitably arrive.
Yeah.
But I believe in this team and I really believe in our product. And I think we have a big head start because I think we kind of call people napping. And as I said, I think we're bringing a market into the world that didn't exist previously. And I think it will, over time, history will prove us to be correct. And that this is a binary outcome. This is a massive, massive transformational shift in how we think about training before we even get to the operational use case. So,
I mean, it just seems like, as I said a few moments ago, like it seems so obvious. Why has no one done it? Because obviously the value proposition is there. Obviously it's there. It's just, why on earth? And the fact that you are doing what you're doing and doing in those aircraft as well, like Berkut. I mean, that looks like it's a bit like your X-wing fighter from Star Wars. You're talking about the things, isn't it?
And they're amazing airplanes. I mean, it's a 300-mile airplane that pulls 9 Gs, right? It's really.
Does it really pull 9 G? Holy moly!
Oh yeah, it'll put me to sleep in a heartbeat. Yeah, no, they're fantastic test airplanes, and representative of the kind of performance, well, exceeds the performance, right, of anything we would train in, certainly in the UK and the US. So the Berkuts are a big part of our success story, but honestly, it's just being so focused. I've built a team of really smart, really ferocious work ethics of people that I love, that are close to my heart, that are just really passionate about this mission. Because I genuinely, hand on heart, really want to solve the training crisis that we all find ourselves in. And the sooner we admit to it, right? And I think we are. I think we're coming to terms with it, that we're never going to solve it using traditional means. This is a once in a lifetime, generational, transformational shift that technology is bringing to training. And I think
You'd
over
like to
time,
think so, wouldn't you, Dan? Because I've certainly learned, even looking at some big business, that that they either don't want to change, or they don't recognize that change is needed. But and even when everything is shouting at them, this needs to change, this needs to change, it doesn't seem to change. So hopefully they will switch on to this, because I'm blown away by what you're doing. Actually, I mean, just see, as I say, so obvious to keep saying that, but do you think that
well, I
that
appreciate.
they are doing that, Dan? Do you think that people are listening out and starting to pay attention?
I mean, I think so, right? I think it's like any entrepreneur's journey. As I said, I go back to, we're bringing a market. We're creating a new market that didn't exist, right? So the inevitable, I think it's the law of diffusion of innovation, right? States that you'll get your innovators, which are kind of as at Red6, then you get your early adopters, right? And then you get the middle ground, and then the laggards and all that kind of stuff. It's your early adopters that we're looking for. Those people that have vision, that can look into the future and connect the dots and understand where this technology is going, because the value proposition of this technology is so overwhelming.
Yeah.
I don't understand how people don't understand what this means for us. It is so overwhelmingly compelling that you just need a little bit of vision to understand it. And you come across the people that will say, "Oh, well, this is not perfect, and this is not perfect." And I'm like, "Yeah, got it, right? Got it. Tell me an airplane that's been perfect from the outset, and I'll
Yeah.
buy you a beer."
Yeah.
So those people I just kind of ignore, right? I don't. The feedback's really important, because we know, what we need to improve. But the point is, look to where this. It's kind of like in BFM, the lead turn. You don't want to be stuck in lag. You want to be lead turning this stuff, because it's coming way faster than people think, and it just needs a modicum of intelligence and vision to be able to understand what this means. But yeah, you'd be surprised at how many people don't quite get it.
I wouldn't be surprised. We could probably sit here and dit on, as we said in the Navy, about all these sort of big companies and people and you go, how have they not recognised this one? There's some people I think are just, I don't know. That's a whole other subject, isn't it, about
Yeah,
big
for sure.
business and what happens. How do you come up with the name Red6 then? Where did that sort of
No,
originate?
that's a classic. I get it all the time. It's not a Star Wars reference. So the idea is this. It's well, red was for Red Air, right? And of course,
Yeah.
we're ultimately aiming to replace Red Air in the long term, big picture vision. That was the red, and then 6 was actually one of the early patents that we filed, was the ability for the same way we did it in the race cars in virtual drift. Could a Raptor pilot take off from Langley and go to his or her piece of airspace out of the Atlantic Ocean? At the same time, a Typhoon pilot take off from Conisbee, go to his or her piece of airspace over the North Sea. We drop into ATARs. Could we connect to each other and see each other and fly either as wingmen together or against each other from different locations in the same virtual environment? And I called that the 6th dimension. And
Nice.
so that's where Red6 came from. And whenever people say, "Well, what's the 5th dimension?" I go, "Oh, you don't know?" And I walk away. So so that's where it came from. Red6, the 6th dimension is what we're building. And really the inspiration for it, I talk about this publicly, but if you ever read the book or saw the movie Ender's Game, right? In essence, it was simply that I'm building Ender's Game. And I believe it is the future of how we'll train.
Amazing. And as a sort of a basic entrepreneur myself, I watch out for all your social media as well. And the Instagram posts are epic. The airplane looks amazing. Want to go and fly one? Looks epic. So go and check out. You've got Red6 on Instagram, haven't we? And Red6 CEO, is that right? They're the two Instagram handles.
Red6 CEO is my Instagram. It's where most of it comes from, and then Red6 Inc. will repost what I do. But largely it's me flying and my dog occasionally. But we within the realms of like what it is we're doing. It's a lot of test flying, daily test flying. I'm still an active test pilot in the company because it allows me to keep my hand on product. And yeah, we do a lot of cool stuff. So Red6 CEO is handle for me on Instagram, and we're working with. What's really exciting about this from your perspective over in the UK is the RAF are really embracing this, right?
Excellent.
So last week we had Air Commodore Kane, Puppy came out here, and UK military flying training in the UK. The 1-star, fantastic guy that came out and actually flew the tech himself and got to see it for real. And I won't put words in his mouth, but I think he saw the future, and that's great because we're parlaying that into our first demo in the UK right now in the Hawk aircraft. which we're going to be flying here in December. And I offer that because it's, the RAF, Air Commodore Kane, Cap Townsend, all those guys over there are really leaning in to the future technologies. And it's really great to see how fast they are determined to go. They've been tracking us for a long time. They've all been out here. They've all flown the tech. They've all seen it for themselves. So I don't have to sell it to them, right? It's like, come see it for yourself. Anything we put on social media is generally 2 years out of date. So the stuff you're seeing, the tech is orders of magnitude beyond that right now. And it's great. And it's leaning into what I think is ultimately what we're about at Red6, which is data-centric driven training, right? And the idea that we create these virtual worlds up in the sky that we can go fly in, but ultimately you have to be able to debrief them and plan them. And so the full ecosystem of taking that data that we put up into the sky, transferring it into the debrief, understanding what the student is doing, even to the point where you start looking at biometrics of the individual, and you start building data sets on human beings to really understand, I guess, why, as instructors, we want to understand why human beings make the decisions they make under duress, right? And so the more objective we can be about that, the more customized, the more capable we are of customizing training to the needs of the individual. And I personally believe the future of this is we don't go through a common training syllabus. I think you tailor the needs of the training to the individual student. So, Andrew, I'm sure you're brilliant at BFM. Dan sucked at BFM. As I went through training, like, for the sake of one extra ride, the amount of people you and I know that got cut from training right at the end,
100%.
right? Well, now no more. So if Andrew's brilliant at BFM, you pass after 3 rides, just move on because the data tells me you can move on. And Dan, you're crap at BFM. You can get Andrew's pickup rides because we didn't use them. But we anchor
True,
that.
I get it.
That.
Wow.
That's right. We anchor that in data, and the RAF gets that. So some of the work that they're involved in is really exciting as well. So there's a really good alignment between what we're doing, not just here in the US, but for the UK, and it's something that I think we should all be really excited about.
That is amazing. I know, just training people, what we do at Flight Deck Wingman, just helping people pass assessment processes, evidence their strength in different areas. Every individual is different, right? But finding a bespoke way to help that one person is something that I've had instructors, I'm sure you did, that weren't very good at that. But why don't we take that human out of it, really, and let it be data driven, like you say? Because then it's totally objective.
Absolutely.
The data drives that, and then wow.
Yeah, I think that all the time. The degree of subjectivity in diagnosing a problem, right? Because when you're looking at a student, you're going, well, here's a problem you came across. Now, first of all, I would say, how did you perceive the problem? Right? Did you perceive it correctly? Then from there, if you perceived it correctly, did you select the right course to take in response to that perception? Or was that where you at fault there? Was that yes, the correct course or not? And if you did select the correct course, was it an execution error? Did you execute it correctly? Right. But the degree of times you chat to a student, you say, hey, blogs, where were you looking at this point? I was like, I had total SA. So, well, actual fact, now with the data, I can tell you exactly where you're looking. And if you're anything like me, I was probably looking in the wrong direction and find no joy. So,
I think I'm probably one of the only pilots that called tumbleweed on one of my early sorties in the Sea Harrier.
And it won't be one.
Yeah, exactly. That means you don't know what's going on, by the way, for people who don't know what tumbleweed means.
Yeah, so it's really exciting, and I think data is going to lead to much more objective analysis and gross efficiencies, improvements in efficiencies over time. So really exciting. It's all part of the tech stack that we're building with ATARs at Red6.
Wow, incredible! Thank you, Dan. To change the subject slightly, I was going to ask you to do not today, Miss Moneypenny, since you missed the bond. I also know that one of your Berkuts has got the Reg 007, so it's all tying together. And
that was actually a really serendipitous thing. That was not by design. That was literally the serial number on that airplane is 007. It's a really weird thing.
And it was laid up in a barn, hadn't been built for about, or looked at for about 20 years or something.
Yeah, about 21 years. It was sitting in a barn, and we found it, and it was sitting there with the serial number 007 on the side. So it was
amazing.
Kind of God maybe telling me, go build this airplane, son, and something big will come from it.
And there it is now, developing all this amazing tech. Dan, I want to move into this section called the winging it section now. So it's a random question, which is totally unrelated to what we're talking about. So if you're ready, I'm going to ask you this winging it question.
I'm ready. Let's do
it. Okay. What would be the title of a book about you if your worst enemy wrote it?
Oh my gosh. My worst enemy. Um, I don't know. Gosh, who's my worst enemy? My worst enemy. I mean, honestly, there's so many things people could say about me. I really don't care, but it's, um, I don't know. It would be, I'll go back to, I'll go back to my teacher. How about this? He thinks he's better than everyone else.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
yeah,
Great.
something
Love
like
it.
that. Something
That
like
is a really, really good title for a book. Speaking of
that.
which, there's a couple
Yeah.
of cool things coming up on the horizon. Um,
Mm.
I've already seen the promo with Laird Hamilton, absolute icon. I used to windsurf, I've never really surfed, but I know Laird Hamilton. All I've got is visions of Laird Hamilton running underwater with weights.
Right.
This
Yeah.
mammoth man, just doing this cool stuff, and then getting on a surfboard with 20-story wave behind him or something. And you've teamed up with Laird for this amazing looking movie or short movie. I'm not quite sure what it is going to be yet.
Yeah.
Called Dawn Ready. Can you tell us a little bit more about Dawn Ready?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Led's a friend of mine now, and I was
As you
approached.
are.
Well, I mean, we don't live that far away from each other, and turns
No.
out if you fly low level and buzz people's houses enough in California, they'll start to complain. And so, one of the many noise complaints that I got was actually from a producer that's a friend of Led's as well, and I think he initially called up to find out who I was and what was going on, and then realized a little bit about my background and what we were doing at Red 6, and just kind of arranged a play date between Led and I. And Led and I met, and it was like bang, we were fast friends. I mean, we're really pretty similar.
Amazing.
It's kind of scary in so many ways how we view the world. And so that friendship grew, and they started thinking about this idea of taking these two individuals that came from such different backgrounds, and if I dare say it, sort of reach the pinnacle of their individual chosen professions and passions. And so it's a look at Led's and I's relationship with honestly being on the edge of driving, our relationship with death, uh, how we think about risk, and what drives us as human beings. And it's this beautiful juxtaposition between Led in the ocean and me in the air, and approaching the same sort of conversation from two very different perspectives. And it's a beautiful short film that should have been out already, but thankfully it's been picked up for a bunch of awards. So
Amazing.
it's going to come out in the new year, and yeah, it will be out Dawn Ready. It's a short film. It's only 12 minutes long. It's a documentary, but it's a beautiful film. The guys Jennifer Corley and William Corley did a beautiful job of it, and Led and I really enjoyed making it. So that's nice. That's something in the short term that we're really excited about.
Fantastic. I'll be putting at least not a link to the film yet because it's not out, but at least a reminder when it does come out. I'll put a link to the film and to your social media channels in the YouTube episode description and the podcast as well.
Yeah,
And
sure.
also a book you mooted to me as well. I mean, there's been so much we've chatted about today. Obviously, there's lots of room for writing things in books. So tell me about
Yeah.
the book.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because I started this work in 2015 when I moved back to Los Angeles, and really it was there was no intent to publish anything at all. It was, you know, when I lost my dad, I realized there was so much I didn't know about him. Um, and so I started writing a book for my kids that I don't have yet, but my imaginary kids that I hope to have one day. Because I just wanted them to know a little bit about their dad and where it came from. And so I started writing this, and I made great progress for a number of years until I got to the point where dad died, and I wrote about the suicide and everything. And then I had to stop. I had to just put it down for a while, and I came back to it a few years later and started completing the story as Red 6 was born and everything. I got busy, but it's taken me 7 years, but I've really started finishing a memoir of my life story. It's not another leadership book. It's not far be it from me to give anyone leadership lessons. It's a book about adversity. It's anchored in humanity. It's a book about setbacks, failures. You think about this perception that people have of you, this sort of life of success and achievement and stuff like that. The reality of it is I've failed so many things and so many times in my life, and had so many setbacks and trials and tribulations. I figured I just tell a very raw human story, and it's anchored in this framework of growing up in a really tumultuous upbringing, my own the footprint of what was put on me from my dad and generation before my dad, my struggles through life, and my journey ultimately to finding peace and forgiveness. And so it is a memoir, but it's not a fighter pilot's book by any stretch of the imagination. Of course, it has that stuff in there as part of the journey, but it's really a journey to peace and forgiveness and acceptance. And I wanted to share it with the world because A, I wanted to write it initially, as I said, for my kids, but B, when I tell my story, it's very rarely the fact that I flew the F-22 that people give a crap about. It's more the human stuff that's very, very real.
Absolutely.
And so I really wanted to be vulnerable in sharing the story, because I believe in vulnerability comes through human connection. And I wanted it to be a voice for people out there that maybe are struggling, that don't feel they have a voice. To let them know that you absolutely do. And so, yeah, at the memoir, its working title right now is The Pyre and the Paper Dart.
Oh, amazing.
It's not a fighter pilot book, but there's some flying stories in there for sure.
I love it. Thanks, Stan. Well, I mean, the whole idea of this podcast, to say at the beginning, is to empower people, inspire people to dream bigger. I can't think of anybody better to do that than you.
That's kind of you.
And is there anyone that you'd like to give particular mention to, Dan, or any organisations or any other people?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a ton of people that supported me on my journey to date, and you all know who you are. Thank you to everyone that's impacted me in a really positive and negative way. Thank you all. I really do want to give thanks to my mom and my own family for supporting me through to my own journey. I'd really love to thank my team, the team at Red6, from Glenn Snyder, the co-founder, all the way through to the team. I'm lucky in that I get to tell the Red6 story, but I don't do much of the work now. They're all doing it for me on a daily basis, and we wouldn't be here without them. And they're working really, really, really hard to make this a reality. To the Air Force and the flyers and the guys and girls on the front line right now, pay attention to this tech. It's coming. Really think about what it can deliver, because it is a transformational capability that is on its way to you. So I'd actively encourage you to take an interest, support us, follow me at Red6 CEO on Instagram. That would be really helpful. And of course, I'd love to thank you for the opportunity to share the story. And I hope it's, for all the right reasons, I hope it's helpful to your listeners, and I hope they find it at least
100%.
interesting. I really do appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you so much for everything today, mate. And thanks for your candidness and your honesty and your vulnerability as well in front of people. Really, really powerful stuff. So thank you very much. Hope to catch you for a beer in California one day.
So yeah, open invite. So, if you want to fly, you got to come to Florida.
Okay. Oh, Florida. Okay. I've got friends in Florida. And do you ride motorcycles, Dan? Have I seen that on Instagram photo?
I do ride motorcycles. Yeah.
I've recently got my motorcycle license. So I'm now riding around on a retro R12 90. I don't know if you know what they are. A sort of
nice. Is that a BMW?
It is. It's a beast.
Yeah.
I scare myself.
They're amazing.
Scare myself daily on it. But I have also got family in Florida and Pennsylvania, and it's my wife's uncle, actually. He's a big motorcyclist. And he said, come over to Florida or Pennsylvania. He's got about 10 Harleys at each location that we can go out riding on. So I'll let you know.
Right there. Yeah. That's awesome.
Okay, Dan, thanks a lot, mate.
I appreciate it. Yeah.